Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the Vince McMahon docu-series on Netflix. This 6-part series features episodes that run for about an hour each, totaling 6 hours of compelling content. For this review, I'll be taking a podcast-style approach, so feel free to play the episode as we go along. I hope you enjoy this in-depth look at the docu-series, and I'll be discussing it even further during my live stream tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Warning: this docuseries will mention abuse, sexual assault, drug use, and more. Please be advised.
All right, y'all. So the Vince McMahon documentary is up on Netflix, and I'm about 10 minutes in. Now, for the most part, the documentary started off as if this was going to be a detailed recount of Vince McMahon's rise from, I guess you can call it humble beginnings, to the major billion-dollar global conglomerate that is the WWE today. The first thing you learn is that Vince McMahon, had aspirations to take WWE to, the heights that it is now. He wanted it to be the premier source for sports entertainment. And Vince McMahon did not know that his name was McMahon until he was 12 years old when he first met his father, which is a very jarring statement. I had no idea that he didn't know who his father was until he was 12. That's an interesting statement. It's also very sad. But I'm going to continue watching it. We're going to do this blow by blow. He was abused as a child by his mother's husband. He said he got beat up on a daily basis. And his motto about it was to just live with it until you can get out of it. What I find in these stories about men who have this type of depravity later on in life and who have a sexual deviancy about them later on in life, these sexual deviancies develop very early, actually, in life. The more you watch how, and I hate to compare it to this, but I just want to make sure you get some clarity on how some of this stuff works, right? The more you watch, docs on guys like Diddy, Jeffrey Epstein, serial killers, they have a similar common vein of behavior. At some point in their lives, there was a trauma incident. Sometimes it's head injury. Other times it's a death. Sometimes it is abuse, whether it be SA or physical, whether it's non-sexual. Some type of triggering trauma has happened to them in their formative years. So as a young man between the ages of like 3 and then going all the way up until their teen years of like 18, in that time frame where your brain is really starting to develop, you are learning how to be a productive person in society. Something traumatic always happens to them, which causes their brain to switch off, and they start to use coping mechanisms to cope or to do things that they like. And these likes become more and more depraved as time continues on. It's fascinating, but it is also very, very disheartening. Despite what he's done to people, I don't think anybody should have to go through that level of abuse that young in their lives. When he was getting abused every day, he was a child, a very small child at that. And not knowing who your real father is until you were 12 is crazy. But they were living in a trailer park. He lived in a trailer park with his mother and his abusive stepdad until he didn't. This is about to be a rough one. So Vince's dad was widely considered one of the best wrestling promoters in the country. he said that his father never discussed with him why he wasn't there in his formative years. And he said that when he first met his father, he, had this aura about him, and he ran up to him to hug him. And his father wasn't that type of person. He didn't give any affection towards Vince in that way. And Vince said to himself, that was different. He just kind of tapped him on his hand and said, just, hey, boy. That can be very, very harmful for a child. Children need love, but they also need structure and discipline. But love should be at the core of everything with a child. When you deprive a kid of love like that, they will seek out feelings of love and just close that gap of loneliness and that wanting and need of acceptance in other ways. And these other ways become more and more dangerous depending on the person. What always interested me is that not everybody reacts to that trauma the same way. If I were in that position, which I never have, I never had to worry about any of that. Both of my parents are in my life and have been in my life since the day I was born. My birthday marks their wedding anniversary. But I would like to think that if I were put in a position where I was hurt like that, my initial reaction would be that if I had a family of my own, I would never do my family like that. And I don't want my family to feel like that. I would seek out what it meant to really love someone. I don't think that I would immediately turn to the other side. I would seek out what it is that it means to have love and nurture and shape my family to be what I wanted for myself. You know what I mean? The interesting thing about Vince McMahon, however, is that he only is going to allow you to see what he wants you to see. During this documentary, in the very beginning, he says, I wish I can tell you the full stories. Holy shit. And then everybody was like, just give us one. And he was like, no, I can't. I don't want you to know everything. And I was just like, part of the reason why a lot of people believe Vince McMahon is his character is because of his secrecy. And I don't think that Vince should have to tell everyone everything. But oftentimes, if you give people the insight that they need and you really provide them with the information, you don't have to do a lot of explaining. Now, don't get me wrong, not everybody is going to understand and accept everything, right? But at the same time, it's like you make your life harder when you're not giving the information correctly. You know what I mean? And you're like, oh, I wish I could tell the stories. At this point in your life, you're in your 70s, close to your 80s. You have nothing else that you need to do. You don't have anything else going on. If anything, it would make people understand you better. So why are you, unless it's going to implicate, well, in a sense, it can't get any worse. Well, it can, but it can't get any worse than what we've heard you've done. And it can't get any worse than what your shitty father did to you. I'm just sorry. Your father is a shitbag. So obviously, I'm like, to just tell the stories and shame the devil is the best way to explain it. He then goes on to explain how he and his father, they didn't really have much of a relationship outside of the business. Vince McMahon Sr. would talk with his son about the business, and he said that Vince Jr. said, I never really saw wrestling until he met his father. He said he saw these larger than life characters. They would have problems with each other, and their resolution was to fight it out in the ring. And he really enjoyed that aspect of it. He became enamored with wrestling through his father. He had already put his father up on a pedestal, and I suspect that has a lot to do with him feeling like his dad came and got him out of a situation that, was harmful to him. And he saw a larger than life, straightforward businessman that was able to build this great, amazing thing. And he wanted to be what he saw in his father. Now, the interesting tidbit here is that Vince McMahon met his wife, Linda McMahon, when she was 13 and he was 16. I'm just going to say that explains a lot. He then went on to, pursue his father about being a part of the business. Dad, I want to be in there. Pop, let me work. And then he sent him to Bangor, Maine. And then the rest is history. But I will come back and give you the blow by blow of how he officially got into sports entertainment. So Vince got the job to be a part of Bangor, Maine, and it was successful. And this led his father to being able to understand that his kid had something. One of the announcers was trying to squeeze them for more money, and it was right before the show. And the man says, "You know what? If I'm not going to get any more money, I'm out." He leaves. Vince's dad thinks for a little bit, and Vince Jr. asks him, like, "Hey, Dad, what are you going to do?" And he goes, "You're going to do it. You're going to be the announcer." He sends Vince out there with no training, no ability to understand what he's supposed to say or do, and he bombed. He wasn't good. You can hear it on the tapes. You're like, "Wowzers, that's some hmm, uh, that's crazy." But because Vince McMahon had a tenacity for telling stories, and he literally said himself that he was BSing his way through announcing, he was able to get by and eventually get better because he was able to exhibit emotion on his face. He was able to exhibit emotion on the microphone when calling matches and announcing matches and feuds. Vince had a way and a charisma about him that allowed him to be able to facilitate or help to facilitate the story that was being told in the ring. So the way that Vince got control over WWE before it became WWE was Capital Wrestling at the time. Vince's father was looking to sell. And Vince McMahon wanted that company. And Gorilla Monsoon was the next in line to take over the company. He knew this, and he knew that Vince McMahon, being his son, with his ambition and his drive, and again, like I said, that tenacity, he knew that Vince was going to make a play for that company, and he did. The play he made for that company in business terms was impossible. It was top heavy, to say the least, on his side. What he proposed is that his father, he borrowed the money from his father and to pay for the company. And then he would have to pay the money back in installments. Every 3 months, every 3 to 6 months, he was to make a payment. If he missed one payment, the agreement was off, the payment would be rescinded, and he would owe money back to his father. So he would lose the company. He would be out of the money that he owes his dad for the company, and he would be back at square one. So all his eggs was in one fucking basket for this company to succeed. That is never a smart thing to do in any way, shape, or form, because the risk outweighs the reward. Do you understand? In order for him to be able to be successful, he had no choice but to succeed. With a man like Vince McMahon, it worked because he has tunnel vision when he wants something, and he's not going to give up until he gets it. So for him, the dedication and the need to prove he is what his father believed, or what he believed his father to be, and him trying to get to that level, that need and want overrode any risk, any scary situation that was coming in that was saying, abort this mission now, right? But if I'm in business and I'm looking at this deal. I would never make this deal, honestly, because it could kill me before I can even get started, number one. And this all benefits Vince McMahon's father. The benefit of Vince McMahon Jr. doesn't come in until the back end. It was a horrible business deal. I don't care what anyone says, but it eventually worked out for Vince and Kennedy McMahon. Now, I would never, I'll tell you this right now, especially in this day and age, don't you ever go into a deal like this, because this can put you in the fucking mental institution trying to make sure you do this. It was like you succeed or your ass is grass. Essentially, what ended up happening is the shareholders or the stockholders and Vincent Sr. agreed to the deal because they didn't think that Vince McMahon was going to succeed in any way, shape, or form. They were like, well, he's going to end up owing us money, so we'll get the company back. We'll put Gorilla Monsoon back in place. Everything will be right with the world. Well, that didn't happen, but we're gonna keep it moving. Linda's in the dock, and she makes it, apparent that Vince made good on the deal. They explained that Vince McMahon did make all the payments that he needed to. His father was very, very surprised and shocked that he did. But Linda tells him how they did it. So the money they would have made that was profit if they had stayed under their current deal or went to Gorilla Monsoon, the profit actually ended up going to the stockholders and Vince's dad to make the payments. So they were essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. And this was basically an investment in what pro wrestling entertainment could be or what it ended up becoming now. Vince McMahon had a vision of what he wanted professional wrestling to look like, what he wanted it to, how he wanted people to be when you spectate this particular style of entertainment. He wanted to upgrade it. He wanted it to not be viewed as the lowest form of entertainment that you could find, but he wanted it to be more than that. He wanted it to be a part of the very fabric of pop culture, have its finger on that pulse. And I've got to say that he was successful in doing that. He wanted to compete with all the other wrestling promotions in the country. At that time, wrestling promoters in the wrestling world they were regional. So what you saw in terms of wrestling, and they put up this huge map, there were certain states, and it's kind of like the 13 colonies, where you see where each colony had its own thing and its own setup. These territories, as they called them, it was a territory system. They had their own belts. They had their own situation going on, promoters, everything you could think of. Okay. So there was Hollywood Wrestling, AWA, Stampede Wrestling, Pacific Northwest, San Francisco, Amarillo, World Class, SCW, Mid-South, Continental, Georgia, Florida, Mid-Atlantic, Memphis, ICW, Mid-America, St. Louis, WWA, Central States, Big Time Wrestling. Toronto was a massive wrestling. NWF, IWA, and then you had the WWE, which was the Eastern Seaboard of the territories, going all the way up to the state of Maine. Okay, so there were so many different territories, and at that time, WWE wasn't competing or including them in, and none of them were. They weren't like champions were wrestling other champions from other territories. This was a very segregated sport at the time. Everybody had their place. No one crossed the lines, and the territories were set to what they were. And they had no intention of going into Vince McMahon's territory or any of the other territories. They stayed where they were. They did their jobs there. But Vince had bigger aspirations. He wanted to be able to take WWF at the time to all over. So he started going into other cities that were in those territories. He started to disrupt what was already set in stone. And he began to travel and do shows. It's interesting that he's the one who started that. It's fucking wild because when you think about it now, like wrestling, that's kind of the gag, you know, it's kind of the thing when you have a professional wrestling company is you get contracts with venues, you know, get your year set up, and then you're traveling all over the country and sometimes all over the world to perform in front of millions of people. And there was a point where that wasn't happening. There was a point where you literally were sitting in one part of the country, showing up to work every day and wrestling. So essentially, what we had was a system like what we see in NXT, where every week the show emanated from one spot and one spot only. Every week, the superstars, aka wrestlers, were able to have a stable home, go from that stable home to work, and then go from work and go back to home, go home. And then every now and then they might have to travel to Madison Square Garden, or they would travel within their territory, but they wouldn't go any further than that. It was very easy for them to maintain a home because there was not a lot of traveling. You know, there was not a lot of demand on there. So it's really nuts that Vince McMahon was the one who gave you the keys to the kingdom, if you will, for traveling and just going into various parts of the country with his wrestling promotion, knowing that he is invading these territories and it is not with the blessing of the owners of these territories. So Vince McMahon was hated in the territories because Vince, even though he says his goal was to take WWE national, his real goal was to poach talent, and that is exactly what he did. In WWE, they were making a lot of money, and the money is what enticed a lot of people to come over to WWF. Eric Bischoff, you see a very young Eric Bischoff, which startled me for a minute. I was like, Jesus Christ, I've never seen this man younger than 40. But God. Oh shit. However, Bischoff explains that he worked for the PWA at the time. Well, he worked for the AWA at the time, and that was one of the strongest territories. The promoters of the territories were very upset that Vince McMahon was rocking the boat. Vince McMahon Sr., however, was the one who was taking majority of the heat. They were like, you need to get your kid. He's going to end up at the bottom of a river if you don't get your kid together. Vince McMahon basically was like, I don't give a fuck about you threatening me, bro. Like, there's nothing you can do about what I'm doing. Maybe you should have taken initiative and did what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it because there's nothing you can do about it. This is business. At the end of the day, I'm going to do what's best for WWE. You can do whatever the hell you want to do within the letter of the law, but you can't threaten me or squeeze me out of anything because you don't own any of this. You don't own nothing. I can go and do whatever I want to do. Essentially, is what he was saying. Those top guys in those territories, their champions, their favorite characters, the best wrestlers, all of them started moving from their original places like the AWA, the SCW, Florida, everywhere in between in these territories, and they all started to shift over to WWE. WWE was just poaching the bigger talent, stealing them all. And this in turn began to dismantle the territories. And that's how Vince McMahon was able to take over. He was stealing talent. He was taking the best of the best and promising them the world. And they came over there to make more money, which some of them did. And then that's when the hell started. He had no remorse for the way that he stole these talents. Essentially, what he says is like, I didn't take anything. I simply offered what they couldn't. this is business. If you can't compete with me, it's America. Tough titty. Don't know what to tell you. He has no remorse as a businessman. And I will say this, in this business and in any other business, corporate America, any sports related business, it is very cutthroat. It is very dog eat dog. It's always been that way. Tony Atlas is in this doc and he basically was just like, he went and promised these wrestlers the world. The same thing he did for me. He said, Vince didn't do anything. Vince all went and got talent that was already built up. So this talent that he had in WWE came from when somebody already did all the work to get them where they needed to be. So the Roddy Pipers, the Tony Atlases, the Junkyard Dogs, Ricky Steamboat, all of these guys were built up in their respective territories. They were really big fishes in a small pond. And Vince offered them this massive ocean that they can swim in with everybody else and make a lot more money doing it. And the money is where they were enticed. The money is where they felt, I could really I can get my points. I could really upgrade my life here. Plus, I'm getting more exposure because this man is going all over the country. He's not just in one little part. I think I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go over here. Now, after he successfully competed in the territories and he was already on top and he was crushing his competition, he was ready to start doing things his way in the company. His father decided that Bob Backlund was the champion that needed to lead the next, set of, to be the next champ. Vince was like, no, he's great. He was an All-American guy, but he was a little too bland. He used the word milk toast. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm going to assume it has something to do with him being just a little bit too cookie cutter. You know what I mean? He's a little bit boring. He ain't got no charisma. He don't really have nothing else going for him. So, ugh. And then he said he was looking for charisma. He was looking for character, personality, and then they showed Dusty Rhodes. I love Dusty Rhodes. I think Dusty Rhodes, it was such an amazing character. He was so charismatic. He was so smooth with it. It was just the promos, the way he walked, talked, and acted. It was a vibe, honey. But Vince said Dusty never really took advantage of the opportunity, which I don't believe. And his son, Cody, is like, the way it was explained to him was that his father says that Vince just didn't believe in it, which I believe that. Vince McMahon is very stubborn. And the problem is he has a specific vision of what he wanted in terms of the next guy to lead them into the new era of WWE. And he ended up selling on Sterling Golden, a.k.a. Hulk Hogan, also known as Terry, who I don't really like or care for, mainly because we'll have a separate conversation about Terry. Terry was working for Vince McMahon Sr. at the time. He was discovered by Sylvester Stallone and asked to do the Rocky film. Because he was asked to do this, Vince McMahon Sr. was dead set against it. He said, no, you're not doing that. If you do it, you'll never work here again. You'll be fired. Terry was like, fine, whatever, I'm out. He was like, you're not an actor. You're not a movie star. You're a wrestler. You don't do that. And he was like, well, no, I'm going to do this movie. He said he knew that the movie was going to be big and he felt like that movie franchise was bigger than Scarface and The Godfather because it was true Americana. I'm going to say nar. I'm going to say nar to that. I will say that it is a massive entity just as much as those other films he mentioned. But I'm going to say Scarface and fucking Godfather are closer to Americana than anything. Everybody always wants to forget that America is like a massive criminal enterprise. It started that way, and it's going to end that way, if we're being honest. Like, people literally came over here and stole other people's land and then cheated them out of the right to defend that land and keep it. And then it's a whole other conversation, but like, it's not true Americana. It's not. It's the fantasy of Americana. I will say Rocky is the fantasy of Americana because you have a man who looks like he shouldn't even be in a ring, let alone competing against these massive guys. And he wins. He becomes the hero, the champion. He does all this training and fighting, and he finally beats the big bad guy. That is the fantasy of America, where anybody and anyone can be in anything. No matter the obstacles in your way, you can pursue your dreams and become whatever you want to be. After Hulk Hogan did Rocky, he was called by Vern Gagne, who was the owner of the AWA territory, I believe. He got his restart, I guess you could say, in wrestling because he was fired by Vince McMahon Sr. He got his restart in AWA, and that's where he started Hulkamania and all that stuff. And it was huge. It took off. It was massive. Everybody was loving it. They enjoyed it. And he was a massive, massive star in the AWA territories. And then the Poach King himself, Vince McMahon, was like, I want that. I want that. So Vince set out to take over the territories, and he used Hulk Hogan to do it. Hulk Hogan was enticed to come back. All Vince had to do was tell him the vision, and he said, look, I want to take over the territories, and I want to start and use you to do it. And then Hulk Hogan was like, okay, when do we start? So he couldn't promote Bob Backlund versus Hulk Hogan because that wasn't going to get any draw. He needed to have a villain in this story. He needed somebody who was, had enough heel work to draw enough ire from the fans. And at that time, there was a political unrest with the U.S. and the country of Iran. There was a lot of issues. Students were being held in the embassy. There were obviously graffiti with anti-USA rhetoric. Same here in the States with anti-Iran rhetoric. It just was not a good time. And it was a lot of, it was a lot of hatred on both sides. And then he liked that. He used that as his means of creating a story. So he used the Iron Sheik, probably one of the most disliked characters in WWE history. I loved Iron Sheik. I don't even like heels and villains in stories. Most of the time, they're very delusional. Iron Sheik was very much a delusional heel and villain, but I don't care. Iron Sheik was one of those dudes that did not give a fuck about anybody or anyone. That man was up Hulk Hogan's ass until the day he died. And I live for every moment of it, so I will never have any Iron Sheik slander over here. Never. But what Vince did was he played up the issues between Iran and the U.S. in wrestling and told the story. This is where we understand how pro wrestling entertainment really was born, because we have now utilized what is happening in the world and created a completely fictional story out of it. Even though Iron Sheik really is Iranian and everybody, is watching this, the American public doesn't see it as a story, doesn't see it as a movie or a show. They see it as reality depicting reality at that time. And Vince was very good at utilizing what was already out there and creating stories that people can latch on to. And because this situation with the U.S. and Iran was big at the time, This was very smart because what you did was turn Hulk Hogan into an American hero, and all the while turned your company into probably one of the fastest growing wrestling promotions in the world. I can't be mad at him for that. I'm actually quite impressed by the intelligence of it, because no one would have thought this big, right? Nobody would have thought this big, but Vince was thinking beyond just the territories. He was thinking beyond just knowing. He was going to a place where he was like, I'm taking this company to the highest of heights, and nobody's gonna stop me. You can now understand why the Iron Sheik hated Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan's match with the Iron Sheik that really kicked off his career as Hulk Hogan, the American, all American guy. He didn't practice this match. This match was all on the fly. And he did some things in this match that was unheard of, because essentially Iron Sheik wasn't a part of the gag, if that makes sense. So he attacked him before the bell rang. Iron Sheik didn't know that was happening. He used his own robe to try to choke him out, pseudo choke him out. Sheik didn't know that. There were things that he did in that match that wasn't a part of the game plan. So if you're not a wrestling fan and you don't know how this works, essentially what they do is they're wrestling, they have their match, and we call it a choreographed sport because in order for it to work, you've got to be able to trust the person in the ring, your opponent, number one. And number two, you got to kind of have a structure. There needs to be a dance here. Sometimes matches happen on the fly and you can kind of, vibe in a ring with somebody, especially when you have really great chemistry. It works, but it doesn't always work. Somebody has to be really good and the other guy has to be really good for it to work out the way it did. And in this case, Iron Sheik was excellent and Hulk Hogan was okay. So they were able to come to terms and create something in the ring that looked like it was practiced, that looked like it was done correctly, even though Hulk Hogan was taking initiatives in the match that he didn't have to take or he shouldn't have taken. And this is one of the reasons why Iron Sheik hates him, not to mention that Hulk Hogan was a grade A snitch. That's, like I said, that's another conversation for another day. It really is. With Hulk Hogan, the company began to be a massive entity, and the territories were falling to the WWE. Hulk Hogan was their ticket to success, and it was very easy to do. Like I said, it was highly smart to utilize what was already going on in the world. And Tony Atlas said basically what they did was they put a mirror up to the people, and that is what they used to create these stories. He said, if you want to know what America is like, just watch pro wrestling. This is a mirror. We are reflecting what you project. But what really scared was when they went into the audience and it was like, who don't you like in wrestling? And the young boy, the young black boy was standing there. He kind of was thinking, and his older brother was like, it's the Sheik. You don't like the Sheik. Yeah, you don't like the Sheik. He was like, it's Sheik. And I said, okay. So he couldn't think for himself. Fine. And then he goes, well, why don't you like him? And he says, it's because he's from another country. And I'm like, the fuck? I do remember it was a different time. It was a different era. It was a different day. So, but even my parents didn't raise me to be like that. They weren't raised to be like that, but my parents didn't raise me to be like that. But the villains during this era of wrestling were all guys who were foreign guys. And that's how it was depicted in the media at the time in terms of our television shows and TV films. They were always the bad guy or the butt of the joke. So they were always Japanese, they were always Russian. So from, you know, it was either Iranian or Afghani or something along those lines. They were always depicted as people who were violent, who were seemingly evil by attacking America. It was just the way that the media wanted them to be portrayed. It still is like that to this very day. It's just a little bit more subtle. And Vince McMahon used that. He used that to create the villains, but that also allowed for Hulk Hogan to be propped up as this massive entity that was saving pro wrestling from the big bad wolves. To be fair, what I find to be interesting is that everybody gives Hulk Hogan all of the credit. You know, without Hulk Hogan, there'd be no WWE. Yes and no, because it turned, one hand turns the other, right? So if there were no Iron Sheik, if there were no Japanese bad guys, no Russian bad guys like Nikolai, if there was no true depiction of what people believed in the United States to be a villain, then Hulk Hogan wouldn't have been as big as he was. He'd be in there wrestling guys like Bob Backlund, and you'd be bored. So while yes, Hulk Hogan was an integral part of changing the landscape of WWE, so was the Nikolais and the Iron Sheiks and everybody that existed and had to endure the hatred that they were that was bestowed upon them for being just simply being who they were. They also deserve some respect, and they also deserve to be acknowledged in this rise of WWE, because without them, Hulk Hogan can't be the hero that you need him to be. Now, Vince's father was proud of his son because his son had built WWE up into being this massive entity now. And he basically was like, son, you did it. You have turned this into a massive, successful business. I'm proud of you. I thought these men were my friends. I thought these guys in the territories were my friends. But he's like, yeah, they don't know anything, and you are the future. So fuck them. And congratulations. I'm very proud of you. And then shortly after that, Vince Sr. passed away. He was 69 years old when he died. And the day before he died was the first and only time that he told his son that he loved him. And Vince McMahon was tearing up at the tender age of 70 plus, sitting there tearing up about hearing, about his dad telling him he loved him the day before he died. Do you know what that must feel like? To be a young man, you're in your late 30s, your father has not said, I love you, not once. And he waits until the day before he dies to then finally tell you that he loved you. That's gotta feel like hell. But at the time, I think Vince was just happy that he finally said it to him. But when you look at it, my question would be, why did you wait until why did you wait until I was why did you wait until you was old and getting ready to be out the door to decide to then tell me that you love me? Why couldn't you love me when I was 12? Where were you when I was being abused in my formative years? Why couldn't you be there for me? Would be the questions that I would have asked. And who knows, maybe Vince asked those questions. But I would have asked those questions. Mm. So Vince McMahon progressed in the world of professional wrestling entertainment, and he utilized pop culture to bring more eyes to WWE. And he started with Cyndi Lauper. She was very popular at the time, and she had used a wrestler to play her father in her music video for Girls Just Want to Have Fun. So Vince took that and he ran with it. And Cyndi Lauper became an integral fixture in WWE for a little while. This is how he was able to cross the brands of these major fixtures, celebrities, and other promotions to really build that bridge, but also to bolster WWE and make WWE be looked at as an entity that has a very similar pop culture feel. Okay. He was very much always looking to the future, which is one of Vince McMahon's probably best assets, but he also was very stubborn and hard-headed, just like his father. Vince McMahon went on vacation with his wife for 2 days, and that's how he came up with the concept of WrestleMania. He took his cues from other sports that had a culmination, a champion moment, Super Bowl, World Series. He basically was like, these sports has their end of the year culmination moment. Why can't we have one big end of the season type of deal? Which, to be fair, makes perfect sense. However, it needs to be a spectacle. It needs to be massive. It needs to be bigger than what you would put on a weekly basis. And well, old Vinnie Mac was able to do that. Mm-hmm. So during this glorious time of WrestleMania possibly being a massive, big entity that it was, there was a reporter who was there to expose the wrestling business. The reporter's name was John Stossel, and he came under the guise that he was trying to see if Hulk Hogan was as popular as the New York Times led him on to be. And he just starts, asking. He was an investigative reporter, obviously, and he was asking questions. Hey, do you guys blade? Do you use razor blades to like cut your foreheads? And then, of course, Hulk Hogan was like, I'm switching. Ran the vents and said, hey, there's a stub reporter here asking questions about the business. He's not here to see about Hulk Hogan and his popularity. He's here to expose us. He's here to tell everybody that wrestling is fake. And Vince goes into the locker room, according to Tony Atlas, and he says, I wish somebody would take care of that guy. There's a reporter running around here asking questions about the wrestling business. I wish somebody would take care of that guy. That's a scary way of thinking. I just would have told them, I would have had PR come in. Like, why did you make it so that it had to be a moment of physicality, right? Why didn't you just say, you know what? This is what you need to say when he asks those questions. This is how we need to prep ourselves for this, because we're going to have people come in. We're going to try to do this. He didn't prepare for this, which is odd because he prepared for everything else, but he didn't prepare for this, which is strange. But I don't understand why he immediately went to violence. It was just like, yeah, I wish somebody would take care of him. Like he was a mob boss or something. David Schultz ended up being the one to slap the damn dog shit out of John Stossel's mouth, because it was rude, number one, to walk up to a wrestler and say to him, I think that what you're doing is fake. And it's just like, even if it is, you can't do what they do. So to call it fake is disrespectful to them. It's disrespectful to the sport, and it's disrespectful to us as fans. It is out of line. Do you get what I'm saying? But it was just rude to go, yeah, I think it's fake. I think you guys aren't doing anything in the ring. I think you're fake. Like, you're literally being invited there and you're standing in their arena. You're standing next to the ring while these guys are wrestling, and just like, hey guys, I hate to tell you this, but wrestling is fake. I'm not saying that what David did to him was justified. I'm saying I could kind of understand it. Now, Hulk Hogan is saying that he never heard Vince say anything like that. I don't believe him. I don't believe him at all. I believe he knew exactly what Vince McMahon was saying. In fact, I believe Vince McMahon said it to him, but he didn't want him to do anything about it because he didn't want him to tarnish his image. And Hulk Hogan knows exactly what Vince has said and done. Now, when it comes to David, he ends up slapping the dude. I mean, he bitch slapped the hell out of John Stossel. Okay. They asked him what happened to David, and essentially they was like he got celebrated. You know, they all celebrated. They gave him a pat on the back. They gave him alcohol. They was buying him shots, drinks, or whatever. He was celebrated. And it goes back to Hulk Hogan, and he says, you know what? Wrestling isn't fake. It is predetermined, but it's an exhibition, and it is a display of a story. You are watching two athletes perform a story, and there's going to be a winner and a loser. Simple as that. So there were a few times where things got out of hand. David Schultz was one of them. The John Stossel, I don't believe he had ear damage or anything like that, but it's very possible. But something about him just didn't sit right with me. It's not even me defending or protecting Vince McMahon, because I can care less about Vince McMahon. It just, something about him didn't seem right, you know? And he's like, I might have permanent ear damage now. And they were like replaying the slap on TV when they were sitting there talking to him. They got a lawsuit for that. Then they got another lawsuit when they went on the Belzer show, which is funny because the guy I'm looking at, I'm like, that dude is from Law and Order, SVU. He was Munch on Law and Order SVU. I'm like, that's Munch. Like, who the fuck? Anyways, he didn't believe professional wrestling was real, and Hulk Hogan put him in a move where he hooked him under his chin, and the dude ended up passing out, fell on the floor, and busted the back of his head, and he was bleeding. And it was bad. He made it look like, you know, he was okay, but he really got hurt. And Hulk choked him out on TV, and they ended up getting another lawsuit because of that. Um, the problem I have with this is that, again, Vince did not assess the risk factors, and he did not prepare his people for going on television and understanding how the media works. He was naive to that, which is baffling to me. You should have had them prepared. They should have been media ready. There should have been training. PR existed back then. So I'm not understanding why you put them out there with, and then didn't give them any safety net. You didn't give them any life jackets, nothing. You were like, yeah, go over there and do that. And it's strange because while, yes, your father did it to you, you want to present the best foot forward for WWE. So why would you then put yourself out there and allow your people to go on TV and not only physically harm and injure a person, but to the detriment that it is on tape. It was streamed and distributed live nationally, so everybody saw it. Now you put yourself in a position where the lawsuit, it's happening, it's inevitable, you need to pay it. And you could have protected yourself had you had done your due diligence. You wanted to expand into these massive markets, into media markets, and you wanted to use the media to further bolden the WWE, but you didn't assess for the fact that there were going to be questions about your business. There were going to be questions about if wrestling is fake, if it's real, if the stories you're presenting is real. You didn't assess those risk factors, and now they're coming to bite you in your ass. It's unfortunate, but this could have all probably been avoided had he had done his due diligence to protect the business without inciting physical violence, but more specifically on the side of having a rollout of answers for these types of questions for his wrestlers to answer when questioned about whether the business is fake or not. WrestleMania 1 kicked off, and it was a success, and it went to the point where they were in small venues, um, with people who just want to watch a bunch of violence and drinking beer and screaming and hollering, to whole families sitting in the front row having merchandise and really enjoying it. It became a spectator sports entertainment type of deal. And Vince didn't care what it was doing to the industry in terms of the territories. He did not care about any of that. All Vince cared about was the success of WWE. At the end of the day, that's all that mattered to him. And his big dream of WrestleMania 1 going off and becoming what it is today, second only to the Super Bowl, is next level success. It's got to be very gratifying to see your vision come to life. And so many people have been made into stars because of WWE. But things never are as pretty and packaged as they seem. WrestleMania literally could have killed WWE. Vince McMahon put all his eggs in one basket. He leveraged everything they had to get WrestleMania off the ground. The reality of the situation is, again, he was a very high risk taker, and there was a lot. It was a very top heavy deal to the point where this was being done to the detriment of himself, his wife, and his family. If this didn't work, they were going to be in the poorhouse. WWE would be belly up, the territories would still exist, and Vince McMahon would be done for in the business. But that didn't happen. I'll say that he was very lucky. However, we all know that even though this story seems to be a fairy tale, it's getting ready to get real dark very quickly. In the end, both of the lawsuits were settled from Richard Belzer and John Stossel. In 1987, John Stossel settled his lawsuit, and in 1990, Richard Belzer settled his. I'm gonna be honest, Richard Belzer had a real case. So did Stossel. I'm not gonna lie about Stossel's case. Something about Stossel just seemed real slimy to me, and I can't shake that feeling. And while maybe I'm looking at it from the wrong perspective, I don't think that I am. He just seemed really, really slimy and really gross. Belzer, to me, had every right to sue, should have gotten the money. I'm glad that he did. Stossel, I'm glad that he got compensated for the emotional trauma he was put through, because you shouldn't be slapped just for saying anything. But something about that man is off. I don't know what it is. Something about that man isn't right. But this was just the first episode, and it was an hour long. We have a long way to go, ladies and gentlemen, because not only now are we going to get into the scandals of WWE and Vince McMahon, we're going to get into the essaying, accusations, the steroid usage, and of course, the masquerading of wrestling being a true sport and having to disclose that it is wrestling entertainment. These were all massive scandals and stories at the time of Vince McMahon's rise in sports entertainment. But it's about to get dark, so prepare thyself.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe for more wrestling content. Check out our merch and consider becoming a member for exclusive perks, special emojis, and members-only content.